And we are live. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the second episode of Eunuch Corner Club Live. We have with us a friend of mine, British Knight. He will be our esteemed guest this week as we discuss the absolute state of Britain. And as usual, my co-host, Carnal Conservative, and Kizza GT. Kizza?
Yes.
Kizza, how about you go ahead and introduce yourself? Carnal, you come next, and then we'll move to British Knight and get this started.
Good evening, all. My name's Kizza. I'm just the engineer of the group.
Moving over to you, Carnal.
I am your local PaleoCon fundamentalist. So I tackle things on culture. I'm making an RPG game. My channel's dedicated to political commentary on general leftist bullshit.
All right, moving on. British Knight, our esteemed guest. Why don't you take a moment and tell us some about yourself and your work?
I'm a small-time minarchist YouTuber who, I guess you could say, is socially and culturally varied, mainly leaning in more towards the right than the left. I've been doing this for a little over a year, and I have been trying to get more into the topics of economics, philosophy, and just how culture is affected by these two things as of the past few months. Like, it's all the way down to trying to pick apart what ideologies are and what they believe, so people have an accurate representation of them, be they of a more libertarian or authoritarian nature.
Fantastic work. I've been enjoying your videos for just under a year, and I believe the first time we spoke was on stream a few months ago, whenever I sent you a super chat. I think that was the first time we spoke much. But I do enjoy you, and thank you for coming here today to talk to us. Before we get rolling, we do have something new. If you would like to send us a super chat, you can do so via Entropy. I just linked it in the chat stream here. And also, you'll notice on Entropy, there is a question widget. So you can pose questions to us, and towards the end of the show, we will be taking direct questions that you put into the question widget, as well as if I see any good ones pop up in the regular chat. That'll start a little over an hour from now. So, with that being said, our first topic today, I'm going to let British Knight introduce. British Knight, go ahead and take it away and bring up the first thing that discusses the absolute state of the UK.
Now, the United Kingdom for quite some time has made it really quite difficult in order to, I guess you could say, criticize certain religions, particularly Islam. In recent times, this has been made into law, not across the UK as a whole, but particularly in the woke capital of the United Kingdom, that being Scotland, run from the devolved parliament in Holyrood. And they've done this really sneakily through the guise of actually repealing anti-free speech laws, because they've essentially repealed a law they've repealed all blasphemy laws, but they've replaced it with another law that would essentially make it illegal to criticize Islam, particularly. Like, you can criticize Christianity, you can criticize Judaism, but you can't criticize Islam. And predictably, this was pushed by a Muslim MSP.
Grr.
Not at all surprised by that. I've been following Britain for a while. So, Kizza, how about you chew on that with us?
Honestly, I don't know why people want to keep Scotland in the Union. They should have been kicked out a long time ago and given their fake independence.
It would be economically sound. It would be economically sound for us to do so. Far less subsidies given out to devolved parliaments.
Well, yeah, I mean, de-evolution sounds nice on paper, but then when you see results like this, you kind of think, F that, go all in on some strong leadership.
Devolution only works it only works better in federalist systems. In parliamentary systems, it doesn't work at all.
No, I mean, honestly, Like I mean, this kind of reminds me of the whole 2014 fake independence vote. I was desperate for the Scots to vote for independence. I was so desperate they would, because then they would have to rebuild Hadrian's Wall, except not quote unquote 1-to-1, but they'd have to put a solid border up, and they'll have to get used to paying for their own stuff for once.
Alba 2, Hadrian Boogaloo.
Yes. But honestly, because I did watch the press conference when they talked about this before on another channel, and my lord, I wish I was in that parliament. I wish I was in that parliament just to rip all that BS around.
See, I actually feel really bad for like Unionist Scots, because I find a lot of Unionist Scots to be very patriotic Brits. They're very passionate. They generally tend to lean towards the right as opposed to the left. They very much have a quote unquote Protestant mindset, but eventually, but they're overshadowed by these sort of nihilistic neo-Marxists in the SNP that have slowly spread their cancer across the across Scotland by essentially presenting themselves as the only viable option, because they've essentially been indoctrinated into hating the Tories, which, to be fair, isn't all that difficult these days. And
it's certainly not.
No, and essentially they're no different from Labour or the Liberal Democrats, so you might as well vote for the SNP, because at least they're a nationalist party, at least on paper.
Yes.
Just because nationalist is in the name doesn't mean they're anything of the sort. They're more like the Scottish sellout to the EU, kiss the boot party.
Yeah, it's nationalists in quotes, shall we say?
Yeah. They seem to think that being anti-English makes you Scottish. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And also, sorry for the technical issues. And also, they're going to call themselves a nationalist party. It's funny how they're very socialist in their nature. Especially the Scottish police. They're very much pro-national socialism, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, I might not. I imagine there may be some people who are a bit less vindictive against people against dictators of a more totalitarian nature than I am, being a minarchist. But it's important to recognise that in their early years they did actually have, I guess you could say, under the table meetings with the Axis powers during the Second World War to essentially give them essentially, rather than go down fighting with the United Kingdom, they essentially wanted to work under the Axis powers as a Scottish puppet parliament.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, honestly, Scotland, like, it just makes me laugh. Like, I don't think they actually realize what they are honestly wanting in their life. And me personally, if they truly want what they really want, why bother bringing it to Scotland? Why don't they pack up and move to the places where they have everything that they desire?
I think it would be highly beneficial for the UK and even for Scotland if the SNP just and Scottish Labour, to be honest, just packed up and went to Brussels, where they clearly want to be.
Well, I would also add the Scottish Conservatives, because they're clearly they're cut from the same cloth.
If my studies of the last many, many years of my life have taught me a truism about the ridiculous left to right dichotomy we have in the West, it's that the progressives are manipulative liars with no conscience, and the conservatives are greedy cowards with no spine.
Well,
Very good.
Let's take. Well, if you look back even at the recent history of, being a libertarian, I'm a big advocate of capitalism, and if you look back at a lot of the policies, they might seem free market on paper, but you actually realise that both the New Labour left and the Tory right, a lot of their policies, they promote big business, but at the same time they make it increasingly difficult for the average Joe to start a business and to compete in the market. It's not capitalism. It's state endorsed cronyism, if anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why you hear a lot of people in the West talk about how it's, hardcore free market for the poor, but comfy socialism for the rich. You hear that a lot.
Well, I coined the term neoliberalism as socialism for the rich.
Well, that's pretty much the same thing. I mean, I'm not trying to split hairs or say anything negative about what you said. It's just the problem that we have, it seems, is, well, I'm going to wax off topic a little bit. When it comes to the problems of the Conservative Party or people that say they're nationalists and end up not and just feeding globalism or whatever, the problem that we have is it seems that you have to have some kind of structure of state. No matter if you're a minarchist like me and British Knight, or if you want something more powerful or more monarchical or whatever, but it seems like you have to have some kind of structure through which people can have protected roads and protected societies, or they're not going to be able to trade very well. So everything sort of boils down to how well can you optimize your market and keep negative forces out. And it seems like the best way that we've been able to finagle all of that together, to use a small hat word, is to build the liberal democracies based on English liberalism and capitalism that we've had in the past. Those are, of course, wrought with problems because, well, look at where we are today. Look at the problems that we've had. But I wager it's still the best combination we've had yet because we've had great success and we haven't crumbled to pieces yet. But what we need to do is try to find a way to build something better and implement it before we have a complete and total collapse, which is probably only 50-50 at this point at best. But go ahead, sorry.
What is most ass-lancing about your observation is, as a liberal society, so to speak, we've already learned the lesson of what cronyism can do. We already know that monopolies are bad, but we keep electing politicians who don't elect the laws on the books to prevent that kind of phenomenon. And it's frustrating because it's so obviously corrupt and it's so obviously awful for the common person. They can't start their own business. The wages from these monopoly entities are atrocious. They can't supply a living standard of living, and we already know, and we've already seen, we've already experimented, we've already gone through those growing pains, and we're just ignoring it because some libertarian says that it should be okay. When we've already gone through the liberal process of discerning what is good and what is horrific.
Yeah, for me, the clear solution to this is to enforce the free market system with a massive scythe to all industries and all services, and make it very clear that anyone fails, you're dead, to put it politely. So, for instance, the 2008 recession with the banking industry, you're all dead.
I agree.
Yeah.
There needs to stop being bailouts and stop being a safety net, especially in government, not just in the market. But I am sick and tired of our tax money just being flushed down the crapper of these programs and agencies that have been proven time and time again to not be good at what they're designed for, and to keep just leaking money like a sieve. And the only solution that government seems to have is, well, just shove more money down the hole. Eventually it'll stick and get clogged. I hate that.
Well, hey, I mean, I'd argue the good way to fix that, taking some notes from Glenn Jacobs' speech on Austrian economics, is to basically take whatever policy that's been enforced in the last, especially in the United States case, the last 110 years, and basically do a complete 180. Because quite often, if you have a policy and it creates a certain result, then by default, you flip it to full 180, you get the opposite result.
Well, that is the hope. But to be perfectly honest, I think that Kiz is right. Giz is correct on this. There's no such thing as too big to fail in capitalism, ever.
Yeah.
But I would also like to destroy the concept of an international company. I want all companies to be to at least declare their corporate citizenship. So
That would
way,
be nice, and we're seeing an emergent need for that, because just look at how things are shaping up. You've got the EU, you've got China, you've got India, the United States, these big power blocks, and now we're completely entangled with these multinational corporations. And in the era of the information age, where all of our business and media and everything is just tossed back and forth digitally, we're starting to butt heads on copyright laws and speech laws and who can compete with who, and it's really becoming just a giant cluster F. And
Yep.
if we can't get a handle on this, then you're going to start seeing the emergence of what I believe have already started, of monopo state, or if you want to use cyberpunk terminology, megacorps that are actually going to start rivaling the power of nations, of states, and using their ability to throttle the news, throttle communication, throttle internet business, to force states to create laws to serve them. And then we're really in a pickle, because then you've got these multinational powerhouses that are beholden to no one that anybody votes for, who actually hold a sword to the throats of our politicians and make them do their bidding. And then we're in a real pickle.
Well,
yeah, I see no objective moral problem with the government coming down and saying, no, you are a company, you have a national origin, and you will be taxed accordingly.
Yeah, I don't
Well,
think I don't think
yeah.
there's anything, but I think when it comes to capitalism, you'll often find that, especially in the geopolitics aspect of it, is that the simplest solutions are normally the best. It very much comes down to a case of having the political will to enforce laws that basically say, no, you are part of this country, you are subject to its laws, and no outside influence trumps us.
Indeed.
If you're will and if you're going to work with collaborate with foreign powers for their benefit rather than the benefit of the citizens you're selling to, then at best you leave the country and you're not part of us anymore, in which case you're not going to have access to this market, or you, at worst, you're gone. You don't exist anymore.
Yeah, but then you start getting into my private company, private property rights, and all that shit. That's what some
Yeah.
people will argue, and I'm just turn around and say, sorry, these companies made their beds, they can lie in it, and also a lot of these companies, especially the Silicon Valley ones, are classified as PLCs. So technically speaking, they have to bow to the will of the government.
Yeah, there's also the fact that a lot of big companies now got that way because they took government money, so they're not technically private entities anymore.
Exactly.
The only industries which can call themselves private entities while taking government money are private entities that rely solely on government money via contracts such as military contractors. That's the only instance in which I would consider a private company taking government money to be in any way justified.
Well, yes, because they're actually providing a specific service for defense, whereas something like Google is not. And to put it bluntly, what kind of makes me laugh about Silicon Valley is they were in a massive pace of bother 2 years ago when Article 11, Article 13 was leaked. And we all remember how that went about. And they were like, whoa, 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 this is going to destroy our platform. But they still got passed through, and even the so-called amendments are still going to screw them. So, but I just laugh at it and just turn around. Well, you brought this on yourselves. Come on now. You claim you want your program to work. These are the rules you got to play by now.
Yeah, I'm starting to get to the point now where I very much believe that essentially ensuring liberty through at least in the short term, that what I like to call the Pinochet solution may actually be preferable. Not necessarily in the throwing communists out of helicopters thing, though I'm never going to complain. But it's more along the lines of ensuring liberty through tyranny, if you like.
I mean, I said this before to Yiz and Frank about this. That what's it called? The best way to enforce liberty is to make the authoritarian types victims of their own policies. So, for example, if you took all the socialists that we have in the UK, for instance, and you remove and you kick them out of their houses.
Yeah, essentially, when you reveal the reality of what they're asking for, that's generally when they'll realize their nonsense and cut it out.
No, I don't think the left is able to realize the end of their desires. If you do anything that goes against their own personal desired outcome, they just come back with, well, that wasn't real socialism.
That's kind of not exactly true in common parlance. That's true if you're arguing with idiots and the useful idiots in government and Twitter and stuff.
What else is in there?
Well, no, what I'm saying is the people that actually make the decisions, people that control media conglomerates, politicians, people that control international business, they don't care about that. Like, if things were changed and it was, I don't know, maybe something went wrong in Hong Kong or whatever, and then there was a big war, and for the last 30 or 40 years, everything's been about, oh, the poor Chinese, oh, the poor Hong Kongers, and they're the ones that were spread all across the Western sphere, then these pieces of crap, they would be rallying around Hong Kong Lives Matter, and they'd be rallying around all this stuff. They don't care as long as the New World Order is pushed. All they want, whatever they're going to do, they'll grab any lever they can. If it's a race riot, fine. If it's feminism, fine. They don't care. As long as they can drive wedges in between Western people and break apart the real defense screen against against the New World Order, which is successful private Western families that don't need globalism. We are the last thing they need to get rid of. Why do you think there's such an assault now on healthy, successful white families in the West? We are the last pillar of the way that was of the West. Once they smash us, it's smooth sailing for them. That's why we're under such assault.
Yeah, but you can't kill a strong family ethos when the opposition to that ethos is going to die in the next 20 years anyway.
Wow,
I don't believe it's going to, because we already have hundreds of millions of people in the West that are what I think West. We've probably got at least 400 million young people that are getting their heads full of lies about the West. They're being taught white guilt. They're being taught to hate their own kind. They're being taught that they shouldn't have children because of global warming and all this other craziness. And I know that some small part of them are going to know the truth, but I don't think most of them are being taught the truth. And unless we can do something to try to thwart that, then we can't just say, oh, well, because these idiots don't have kids, it's going to die out. When you have this stuff institutionalized to a point to where it's going to keep propagating like a virus into anybody whose heads it can go into.
Well, I mean, I would dare say the part of me, as much as I agree with you, is part of me is kind of thinking to themselves, well, these clowns brought this upon themselves, so it's their own bloody fault, so they should have the good grace to lie in the bed that they made. But at the same time, I would argue, in order to save the West, and I use that term quite loosely, we may have to, dare I say, go back to some old-fashioned methods in order to fix the problems. Because sometimes the only way to go forwards is to go backwards. But the real question is, sorry to interrupt. Arnold,
go on with the real question.
Yeah, but the real question is, who's going to press that button? Like, for example, let's say, the Islamic question. Who's going to press that button? Are we going to continue pushing this lie that Islam's a religion of peace, or are we going to treat it as the fascist religion as it is and stamp it out?
You already know my opinion on that. I made a video on it.
Well, for sure, Frank. But I mean, for me, this kind of goes back to my point earlier, where I coined the term "mirror veritas." Is that I would argue the best system is to rip apart this, is to basically disregard this concept of universal rights, and replace it with subscription rights. Now, I know people are going to think, Jesus Christ, kids, what the fuck are you talking about? Well, take it this way. Universal rights are great for a liberal society, but those who are illiberal will happily abuse those concepts and will happily use them against us. Whereas if you have a subscription style of rights, if you don't agree to the subscription, you will not gain the benefits of said subscriptions. So, for example, as my point was earlier to the socialists, since they don't support private property rights, well, then they're going to be left homeless and butt naked.
Well, that's all well and good, but I mean, like we talked about previously, there's no real way to enforce that. You can't do that. I mean, that's a great idea to be like, oh, hey, well, you ascribe to wanting to silence others, so other people can silence you. But the problem is you have to have such institutional power behind that. I don't see how we could actually get that to implement it. And even if we could, I don't even know if we should. That sounds a little too authoritarian for my tastes.
Well, I know it may sound authoritarian, but all I'm saying is you might as well play the mirror that these idiots want to play.
I just like enforced liberalism. I just like the idea of using that what is it? The subscriptive rights, that you don't need subscriptive rights if we're all equal under the law and we actually enforce it as such. You know, we've just gone too far on this idea that hate speech exists. We've gone too far on the idea that we need affirmative action and, you know, how would you say,
positive discrimination.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That. It's just the idea that we need something other than the rule of law to subvert ourselves with, and that's the thing that we need to push back against. We just need to, you know, put the child in the corner and say, no, these them rules.
Well, that's the thing. This all began with the introduction of what is known today as positive rights. Like originally there was no distinction between what was and wasn't a right, but there has to have that distinction now because what originally was considered right is now considered negative rights or natural rights or inalienable rights, where now what we consider now there's positive rights which are essentially subjectively applied rights, like the right to vote, for example. The right to vote wasn't an inalienable right. It wasn't like free speech or the right to own property. Like there was no right to vote. That was something that was either assigned via social status or something that was earned.
Absolutely. That's why in the modern era I am strongly opposed to what democracy has become, because it's basically become the uneducated mob gets tyranny over the educated minority. And also on top of this, we're having idiots in the West talking about lowering the voting age, giving people who aren't even full citizens or native born the right to vote, and it's just going to get out of hand and become ridiculous.
See, the idea that there aren't completely liberal liberal in the ideological sense and not the current sense, like there aren't liberal solutions to a lot of these problems is a nonsense. It's the lack of political will to go about it. For example, you want to discourage Islamic immigration to the UK? Don't give them benefits. Cut them off. Make it citizens only.
No, I would make
exactly. That's what I've been saying. I don't know how many of you have seen my second deep double analysis on a case for nationalism, but the second half of that long video is specifically about what we can do. And a big part of that is exactly like what British Knight just said, what Enoch Powell used to talk about. We create incentives and disincentives into our system to optimize for the people we want to keep and to incentivize the people we want to leave to get out.
Well, I would argue the Mirror Veritas idea is the quote-unquote, dare I say, a system where basically everyone's under the microscope, regardless of who you are. And then by doing so, with the subscription-based models, you basically force people into their said categories, whether they like it or not. So if they don't want to be in said categories, they're going to have to change. So, for example, with, let's say, the question of Islam, if Muslims don't want to live under Sharia law, well, they got a simple choice. Accept that Sharia law is the rule of the Quran, or deconvert.
Well, that's easier said than done, but I mean, I do take your point. Like that is a good system of incentive and disincentive that doesn't require, holding anybody at the end of a gun or anything. But still,
well, Well, yeah, but
Go
like
ahead.
for instance, what Enoch Powell was talking about, right? He brought up this is something that's been brought up in recent times. Voluntary repatriations. I'm not sure if everyone's here has heard of that.
Uh-huh.
Is everyone? Okay. So
No, you'll have
basically,
to say again. Say again. What?
so voluntary repatriations.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of
I am a
it.
strong supporter of that, and I would like that to be more incentivized.
Okay, so
Uh-huh.
for anyone in the who's watching has never heard of this, the idea of voluntary repatriations came about because what Enoch Powell learned during his time in the 60s and 70s, and he was interviewed on this, was that there was a lot of those from the Windrush generation who wanted to return home but didn't have the means to do so. And this was a system to say to these people, okay, here's some cash, you can leave.
And see, I think that's a great incentive because look at the rabble that we have torching and destroying America right now, tearing down our statues. Look at these idiots. They hate the West. They seemingly hate white people. They seemingly hate our system. They don't want capitalism. They want Marxism. Why don't we offer these people money and supplies and a pat on the back to say, hey, you don't have to be here anymore. Do you want Zimbabwe? Do you want South Africa? Where do you want to go? We'll send you there. Mazel tov. Enjoy yourselves. Go have your own country away from evil Whitey. Go. Be merry.
But see, this would have to be done as an international bloc because otherwise we would just be palming each other's undesirables on each other. Like America sending them to the UK send them to France sending them to Germany send them to the US over and over and over again.
Of course, this is going to require complicits. That's why it's going to cost money, because money greases the wheels. So you would say, okay, we have all these people here in America that we don't want. And of course, many of them are not going to accept, probably even most of them. But for the ones that do, we have to cut a deal with the places that they want to go. We incentivize them to say, hey, let's say, for example, South Africa. It's Marxist. It's largely black and all that. So we appeal to the people that that's a good match for here in America. They even speak English down there. So we could say, hey, South Africa, we'll cut you a deal. Here's some money. Here's some food. God knows you need the food. So, we're going to give you this if you'll take these fuckers that don't want to be here anyway. And then both places agree that they can't come back to America. And then other places can do the same.
Revoke their citizenship. Well, yeah, I mean...
Of course.
Basically say, sign this piece of paper, you'll get all this money, you'll get sent to the place you want to go, but in exchange, you revoke your citizenship and you're not allowed to come back ever again.
And your constitutional rights.
Well, I mean, that goes without saying once you're not a citizen and off of our soil. But what I'm saying is that's a given for anything I talk about is if you're going to leave, you have to sign some kind of binding contract that you immediately, once you are in the place that you're going to go, you lose the citizenship and all status you had where you're going from, which would be America, and you are not allowed to apply for anything other than international asylum in the next, 50 years or some shit like that.
Yep. And to be fair, if you were to do that, especially in the United Kingdom, I would dare say you could get rid of at least 10% of the population.
Yeah, in the UK, I think people would be far more inclined, especially considering that a large portion of, especially Muslim communities, don't seem to be all that discontent with the countries they came from, to the point where they'll actively go on holidays to visit their families in their home countries.
You're right. It'd be a lot harder sell in America, but you're right.
Well, touche. But as Phoenix made a good point, that was the policy that created Liberia. Quite literally.
Yeah, and look how
which
that
didn't go
out.
so well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but that's because they regressed back to their old ways. Some would say.
Well, that's not our fault.
Well, exactly. It's not our fault. It's their fault. I mean, me personally, I think, especially with a lot of the people from the BLM movement in the United Kingdom, I'd be like, okay, then South Africa, how about I do you a deal? How about we take away the white Boers and you take our freaking BLM supporters? How does that sound? Great. Good.
I'd fucking love that.
Oh yeah, great. Because then that we get a bunch of farmers that we could tell our current farmers here who are scrounging money through the Common Agricultural Policy and tell them, now look, we got some real farmers here. You're out of a job. and therefore we get good agriculture again.
Just like now, look, you've got people to compete with now, and we're going to give them land. So you better get your arse in gear, otherwise you're not. Otherwise, sink or swim, motherfucker.
Well, actually, I wouldn't even bother with that. I'd be bleeding the old farmers dry because they've been scrounging for decades thanks to the Common Agricultural Policy.
Well, that was one of Margaret Thatcher's better ideas, was the fact that she essentially got us out of the EU agricultural deal because we got us out of the EU agricultural deal because we were essentially paying subsidies, not to our farmers, but to the farmers of everywhere else in continental Europe.
Oh, good lord!
Yeah, and also we're paying our farmers to sit on our backsides and grow nothing, hence the inflated price of food. But ironically enough, I don't hear Remainers disavowing that policy, even when I pound it into them, especially like that freaking coward Femi. So yeah, well, he is a coward. I challenged him to a debate like 4 years ago, and he refused.
Wait, who is this?
David
Femi, he's the guy caught behind the main face behind Our Future, Our Choice. He's one of those quote unquote young Remainers, whereas it turned out when you look at his background, he's from a proper privileged background.
He's the black bloke who became an MEP for the Green Party, but then got kicked out of the EU. He got kicked out of the EU Parliament for not dressing properly.
Oh,
That's
good
funny.
lord!
Yeah, I just laugh at no, that wasn't him. No, that was the mayor of Sheffield you're thinking of.
No, if it did happen to Femi, I can look it up if you like.
Are you sure? Because I know the mayor of Sheffield became an MEP and basically got kicked out because he wasn't in the suit. Yeah, that's it. Magic. That's the Green Mayor. Yeah, thank you, inconvenient one. Thank you for that. I knew it wasn't Femi. Yeah, Femi's the guy who founded Our Future, Our Choice. He's the one who loved to troll Nigel Farage when he was on LBC, and also
so you're right. Yeah, I rescind my previous statement.
Yeah. Sorry. He also at the time had a little debate with not Gerard Batten. Who was the leader of UKIP after Gerard Batten? I forget his name.
Michael Brain,
Richard Brain, yeah.
Richard Brain,
He's a
Richard Brain.
wanker. He's no good.
Yeah, him. And I wish because I happened to be at work at the time. I wish I was in London when that whole happened. I would have loved to have challenged him and roughly ripped him apart of his BS on EU. Like, especially his support for the single market. My God. He says, oh yeah, but with the single market, you only have to make one product. I'm like, actually, Femi, technically speaking, if the UK was to pull out the single market, the European Union would be forced to make all their products meet to our standards. But technically, the UK doesn't have to abide by their standards because our standards are significantly higher. And he didn't like that, even though I had the evidence to prove it. Yeah, and also, fucking that makes me laugh. And also, speaking of which, it makes me laugh how for years they keep on talking about economics. Yet, funny enough, they can't seem to explain why non-EU countries, even the wealthy ones, have grown vastly higher than the UK did as a member.
It's because we're a net contributor. We're essentially paying taxes in order to keep countries that would collapse without us afloat in Europe.
Exactly.
Well, yes, but it's like I pointed out to a Europhile a few times. The UK's economy has quote unquote doubled, but yet the national debt has skyrocketed. Yet it has multiplied by a factor of, if my maths is right, about a factor of 60.
Oh my God!
And it's still climbing.
Same way in America too. We're going trillions and trillions more into debt.
Yeah.
Yep.
This Keynesian nightmare ain't going to last forever. It's going to collapse.
See, the thing is, the post-war national debt was mostly paid off by the late 70s when the economy started going to shit before Thatcher took over. But like ever since then, it's began to creep up again to the point where it's about nearly as half. The national debt is about nearly half as big as it was at like immediately after the Second World War.
Well, I mean, actually, if you look at I actually looked at the graph on the national debt. When the UK joined the EEC in 1972, it was around £36 billion. It's now currently at over £2.5 trillion.
I was talking as percentage of GDP, not in nominal numbers.
Sorry. Percent of GDP. Yeah, I think when it came to debt, I think the highest based on percentage of GDP was literally right after World War II.
Yeah, it was about
into major austerity.
It was about 200%.
Yeah, I think it may have peaked as high as 250%, if memory serves.
Yeah.
I'd like to take this moment to remind everyone we now have Entropy, which I am linking in the chat. Entropy has a useful question widget over on the left-hand side. You can leave us questions, and at the end of the show, we'll go through those, and the panel will briefly address them. And if you'd like to contribute to us, to me specifically, to be able to make better and more content, you can always leave us a super chat and give us a little money.
Yep.
And also we'll be linking my PayPal and Subscribe Star if you'd like to give me money in a more regular fashion. All right, I'll pass it back now.
Yeah, cheers. Actually, British Knight, while we're here, I do have a good question for you.
Go ahead.
Where do you stand in regards to the talk of the 3 million or so Hong Kong citizens coming to the United Kingdom?
I take a rather radical approach in that I think we should revoke our Anglo-Chinese treaties of handover, and we should storm Hong Kong and take it back as a colony.
Oh, I like that.
Interesting. Okay.
I genuinely believe that.
Okay, that's fair. I was more question about the possibilities of potentially 3 million or so Hong Kong citizens claiming, I think it's political asylum in the United Kingdom.
I think we would have. See, it's difficult because, like as I stated from my previous position, I do think Britain has a duty of care to its former colony, especially as the handover is still technically not complete, as it was meant to be a 50-year process, which only began in the 90s.
Yeah,
but much the same. I think it would be a net negative on the citizens of the United Kingdom to accept 3 million people, and hard-working, competent people at that. It's not a knock on the people of Hong Kong at all.
Yeah,
into
definitely.
the country in order to compete.
Yeah, even though that they may be sympathetic allies to us in regards to how they view markets and freedom of speech and stuff, it's still a net negative to have an entirely different cluster of people rapidly move in and start supplanting your native population. Even if they agree on most things, that's still a dangerous destabilizing force.
Well,
let me add another aspect to this. I'm sorry to interrupt, because
sorry.
Does the CCP deserve the infrastructure built by the Hong Kongers? Do they actually?
Of course they don't.
No, they don't. So if they don't deserve it, why give it up? I'm with British Knight on this. Conquest. Retake the land.
Well, here's the thing: it's it's obviously not something that's an idea that's abjectly hated by the Hong Kongers. I mean, they were flying both the Stars and Stripes and the Union Jack and even the Hong Kong colonial flag during the protests. I believe they even draped the Hong Kong colonial flag over the Parliament over the speaker's stage in the Hong Kong Parliament.
Well, it sounds like the only thing they were missing was a good old-fashioned tea party.
That depends what kind of tea party we're talking about. No.
Well,
I mean,
British or American, they could have gone either way, and it would have been beautiful.
Touche. I mean, me personally, it's like as much as I personally would love to see that whole original 50-year treaty just be say, sorry, CCP, you violate terms and conditions. F off. But the reality is Boris and Nat are just too cucked to even do that. I mean, hell, the only two people I can think of in British politics who would have done that would have been Winston Churchill and Enoch Powell. I doubt even Thatcher could do that.
See, because here's the thing.
Trump could.
No, I'm saying for UK politics. I'm saying UK politics.
Because here's the thing. What they've done is essentially said 3 million Hong Kongers can come to the United Kingdom and we're not going to sell weapons to China anymore. Except here's the thing, we shouldn't have been selling weapons to China in the first place, and also we're still going to be selling to people who will then sell those weapons to China, so they're still going to get into their hands either way.
Yeah, like Saudi Arabia.
Did any of you hear about what Trump did with the through executive order when he basically completely hamstringed the Chinese economy?
Wait, was this with the tariffs?
Yeah, it
Like
just recently
early on?
happened. It was
Yeah,
great.
he essentially, I think he used the Hanover Treaty as grounds for this as well. He essentially said if any Chinese any company, any official, any action, any enterprise, whether it's in physical goods or technological, that is linked to an official that has been linked to the this is a very, very broad executive order where he said anyone linked to the economy or the technological ability to oppress Hong Kong is now banned. You are blocked from the U.S. economy. You may not have any more influence or power. It's
And
beautiful.
that does sound great, but the trouble might be with trying to enforce that, because you're going to have a lot of power in America from both the private sector and the government want to fight that the best they can. But it is a nice proclamation, and I do hope to see it actually fight against Chinese interests.
Well, I mean, with the whole thing of China, what everyone seems to ignore the fact is China's only into position it is purely off the back of America pumping them full of money.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
And
which I desperately want to stop.
It was the mistaken idea that economic liberalism would lead to social liberalization,
which is it's never been proven to be the case.
No.
I mean, it didn't work in Russia.
Oh, no, it didn't work on Russia. In fact, that's what kept Russia limping along for so long.
Well, yeah, that's why a certain man named Yuri Bezmenov outright advocated for all that to be terminated.
If only we had taken McCarthy far more seriously.
Well, I mean, apparently, if you wanted full-blown McCarthyism, that you're apparently a communist, according to certain people.
Well, now, ain't that the perfect example of double think you'd ever heard?
Yeah, I know. That's and I said to the same people, really. So,
not all authoritarian statism is communism. Communism is a very particular thing.
Yeah, exactly. But as I pointed out to these individuals, so me demanding all Muslims to live under Sharia law makes me an Islamist like ISIS, then, right?
Oof.
Does me demanding Jews live under the laws of Leviticus make me an outright Zionist? Or whatever the Jewish
because that's
equivalent
not what a
is?
Zionist is, dude.
Sorry, my mistake. What's the term for like a Jewish extremist?
If you're talking about ones who want to adhere completely to religious doctrine of old, I'm pretty sure those are called Hasidic Jews, I think. At least that's what they're called on the East Coast here in America, the Hasids.
Well, they're not being classified as Orthodox Jews.
I don't know enough about Judaism to break that down. I'm sorry.
I think Orthodox Jews are essentially our equivalent of like Catholics or Protestants. It just means that they're pious Jews.
Right.
Pretty much. Right.
And a Zionist is more of a statist mixed with a new take on religion. It didn't even start till like 100 years ago. Like it's
it basically just means that the Jews should have essentially a God-given right to, or a Yahweh-given right.
Yeah, there was a book written by a dude, I don't remember who it was. It was basically the manifest destiny idea of America mixed with the German Lebensraum idea of the Reich, but about Mount Zion and creating Israel and having a nation for the people of Israel, which in a way everybody else liked at the time because nobody wanted the fucking Jews anyway, and they were like, hey, let's put them all in one spot and get them out of here. That's a great idea. So it got a lot of traction at the time.
There was also the fact that the British kind of realized they were starting to realize towards the end of the Second World War that they had done a bit of a deal with the devil when dealing with the Palestinians. And they were like, yeah, maybe it would be better if the Holy Land was actually held by Jews rather than the Arabs.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, maybe this is my spiteful Englishness out of this, but from what I understand, technically speaking, they're still in exile, so surely they should stay in exile until their deity has told them to go back.
Yeah, that's actually scripturally debatable, but we won't get into theology right now.
No worries, no worries. But yeah, I mean, it does seem to me that, well, I mean, I know people much older than myself used to worry about the Cold War potentially leading to World War Three. Well, we might actually potentially get another form of Cold War or World War Three with China and the, well, United States or the Anglosphere, you could say. Because if things do get heated, neighboring
Well,
countries are going to get dragged in, as well as fellow allies are going to get dragged in.
well, the main question of war is we're going to do this or what? And the thing with China is they have no power or clout without the American or Western market. Period. Like they have absorbed so much of our debt. Going to war with us would just it would annihilate their economy. It would annihilate.
Yeah, and that's I got to step in here. The reason that we're
Sorry.
not going to see an open hostility between China and America is because China knows so much of their money is tied up, not just with us with our manufacturing and import-export, but for decades now, they've been buying up and owning a lot of property in America. And America controls that property, and if they want, they can just seize it and be like, sorry, Chinese nationals, GTFO, our property now, and then all those millions or billions or whatever are just down the toilet.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, because I know Australia and New Zealand made a law stating that the housing could not be brought by non-citizens, if
Based.
memory serves. Yeah, because I would love to see a policy like that here in the UK, which British Knight will definitely tell you for, because especially with our housing market issues, especially in the southeast where I live, oh Lord, the prices have outright skyrocketed. So many housings, especially in London, are brought out by the Qatar, Saudis, freaking UAEs, and Russians, and they're basically just there to flush money and nothing else.
But see, because here's the thing, with London especially, what's happened is that essentially the government is essentially slushing money to essentially construction firms to say we'll give you money as long as you don't build houses, and they're also using regulation to essentially say you're not allowed to build houses here and here and here. A large part of the green belt, which is essentially our countryside, like a large part of that is essentially it is illegal for construction firms to build houses on that land for environmental reasons, in quotes.
Yeah, well, sorry.
So it's essentially gotten to a point where it's incredibly difficult for new houses to be built by private firms to drive that to meet demand and drive the prices down. So
yeah,
and especially with London being as big as it is, it's essentially gotten to the point where the growth of the city in terms of actual physical, physical size has halted because they've essentially over-regulated to the point where building new houses for people, especially private houses, is near impossible. So most people are relying on social housing, which is exactly what the government wants.
Yeah,
Exactly.
well, the only big issue I have with that is, speaking as someone who lives in a ridiculously overpriced city, all the green belts are owned by the main university in question, and they keep on saying, "Oh, we have no money," but they'll charge up to the bloody roof to build on the greenlands, which screws over everyone in the entire freaking city in question. And any house building do, they just basically build a bunch of student flats, which are not beneficial to the public as a whole.
Well, that's also part and parcel with the fact that everyone's going to university now. But
when I'm saying student flats, I'm talking international students, not UK's. No, that's literally all they're there for. And where I live, we have a 20+ year long waiting list for housing.
Dear God.
Yeah.
That's how ridiculous it is.
Actually, no, that is on par with socialist programs.
Yeah, there's a picture I shared recently on Twitter that was this.
Follow years on Twitter, by the way, guys.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter if you don't. You can find all the links in the description. There's a thing I shared. It was I don't remember the name, but it was a town in the UK, where it was a picture of just tons and tons of Asian foreign exchange students, just buckets of them, like 50 or 60 at this one school. And if you Google the name of that school in town, you'll just be inundated with hundreds of pictures of smiling white British folks surrounded by non-native British, non-white kids. And not that that's particularly evil or wrong, but it's just a sign of what the government is actually pushing for. They want open borders. They want people of other cultures and ethnicities to just flood in and come in and out like a revolving door. And having a small amount of that controlled, like I've talked about in other videos, is okay, but it's evident that if half of your school is from another country, then that's not a good sign that your leadership gives a crap about the native people.
Well, yeah.
They've essentially taken the Rousseauian approach to how they essentially treat people, where they essentially view the default position of people to be good, and it's only society that makes them bad. So that,
which we know is false, because people are innately self-serving for good or ill, and that's why when you have a lot of different groups together, it doesn't work, because they're all innately group-serving.
Well, that's exactly it. It's like you've got to remember that a lot of these, I guess you could say, more totalitarian, what we would consider backwards cultures, formed as a result of essentially living in areas which don't produce crops. They don't produce any kind of standard of living. So essentially, people essentially built cultures around like defaulting to social Darwinism, where the strong prey on the weak. Like that is, and essentially you're importing that over here in a society which has been built on agricultural development and technology and better standard of living, and our culture reflects that, because we've essentially developed I guess you could say, an almost innate desire to make sure everyone's living to a certain degree of dignity, but that's just not how. But in comparison, that's not how a lot of these people think. They come from a society in which, in which the strong survive and the weak get fucked over, and that's not the type of attitude we want for citizens in this country.
Because it's not. That's terrible.
That's not how our culture functions. Our culture is based on a hierarchy, not a hierarchy of strength necessarily, but a hierarchy
but competence
of competence
and desire.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's bad because one or two generations of that is all it takes to completely spiritually destroy a people. And that's what we're starting to see. We have millennials and Gen Z who, for the large part, they aren't driven like people of my generation and earlier to want to have their own business and have a good career so they can have a nice big home and have lots of kids and have family and have community. That seems to be almost non-existent in people under 30 these days. And I think what you're talking about is a direct cause of that, is they just don't see it reflected in the people around them teaching them.
Well, I mean, on that point, I mean, it's not just a case of the entire Western world. It's just become so freaking untenable to be able to get a house, have a freaking proper family in the traditional sense. You just can't do it unless you're earning a silly amount of money, which you have to be in the top 5%.
And this is the reason that I talk about the successful, happy Western white family being the last barrier that globalism wants to shatter before it takes over, is because, think about it. If you don't have a family business and you don't have land or a home and a family who believes in those things to give those things to, then you're nothing. You're just an integer in a corporate spreadsheet, and when you're dead, the world doesn't change. And that's terrible. That's ugly. That's not who we've been for hundreds of years. And it's changed so rapidly, it's disgusting.
Well, yes, but this is partly why I'd say this is where, with what you said earlier about democracy, having a go at democracy, I would dare say everything that's happened is not a byproduct of democracy, but a blatant byproduct of minority ruling and foreign interference.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I would argue, I know obviously you two are Republicans, and obviously British Knight is it minarchist, right? British Knight?
Minarchist libertarian, yeah. It's essentially one step away from it's essentially like smallest stake possible that isn't an ANCAP.
Okay, fair enough then. So basically, how America was originally founded on, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, like my mentality is, and I've had this argument with many when it comes to democracy. If democracy was truly enforced, and I mean pure mob rule by the public, but on every single little detail, the overwhelming majority of policies we currently have in the West would never have existed. Case in point, the European Union. The UK public never voted to join it back in 1972. For instance, or
Correct.
the mass migration we'd have. No one voted in favor
Correct.
of that. Hence the talking point, we were never asked.
And in America,
Uh-huh.
and in America back in the 60s, there was not a referendum or a public to-do about the Immigration Act. I don't even
Exactly.
recall that being a large point between arguing parties at the time. It was just something that was pushed through, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to change this and change that, and then look, since then, since the 60s, the host population has just absolutely nosedived, and now we have like 10 times the Asians we used to, 40 times the Hispanics we used to. It's crazy. It's just this rapid replacement of the population. It's unhealthy and untenable.
You all
It's
want
going
to
to
hear
make us
something
collapse.
funny? You want to hear something funny?
Sure.
I grew up Italian, and my grandfather was a Democrat. He helped start the docks, the unions at the shipyard docks. He was very active. He is there are photos of him marching with Cesar Chavez. My grandfather was part of a generation that actually believed that if you raised immigration's rights and raised their wages and all this other good stuff, that it would incentivize American companies to actually hire more Americans rather than illegals. That
So
was
what?
one of that was one of their talking points. So that was one of their big uh, neoliberal compassionate pushes, was to raise the standards of living for migrant workers, that it would pressure companies to hire more Americans. And we see where that bullshit lie has slipped down further into. It didn't work. It was never going to work. And it's just these tiny sleight of hands that our ruling elite pull over our eyes. And my grandfather, though a Democrat, lived long enough to watch his party betray everything he ever stood for. So,
Yeah, that's pretty much the same boat that we're all in. If you think about old people of either stripe, whether Democrat or Republican, they were all sold out. Neocons, or cons became neocons, libs became neo-libs, because they all wanted that sweet, sweet corporate money, and they all just didn't give a crap about their poor, stupid constituency. The left has social justice lies, and the right has moral majority lies, and they lied to everybody and sold us all out. And that's why we're in the debacle we're in now.
you know what? I wish it were true that it was the moral majority lie, because the moral majority didn't want this. It was
No, that's what I'm saying. It was
an
the moral majority
esoteric.
lie of the Republican Party. It was dreamed up by a senator in 1978 to basically said, "Hey, we're losing to this social justice mass migration garbage to the left. How we need a user base that we can just tell to vote for us, and they'll do it no matter what." So they said, "Okay, we'll just tell everybody that Jesus wants them to vote for us," and then that worked. And then
My
then the
God.
1980s happened, and the 1980s happened. And then you've got all the bullshit Reaganomics stuff that basically opened the floodgate for multinationals and monopoly state garbage. And then look where we are now.
Yeah, the return to populism is inevitable, as Steve Bannon said, and
Yeah,
it's amazing to watch. I'm glad I'm getting to live through it, because people are finally, waking the fuck up. But it's, what can these people do on the ground, like as average, just regular people who want to see these changes made? And it's interesting, because on the right you have a massive influx of people who were either just normie conservatives, or the most degenerate of liberals, wake up and realizing, holy shit, I have this inner human beast inside of me that wants a family, that wants wholesome structure, that wants all these good things. And the main struggle that I see, like underneath the surface, is them wanting to re-embrace that old American or old Western ethos of having a family and being your own master that we have lost.
Yeah, I mean,
and they don't know how to grasp for it at all.
no, I mean, this is where I say this is why I bring up the point of going backwards to go forwards, because the reality is that if you have as we talk about demographics, if you have a demographic change so drastic it becomes non-recognizable within a few generations, don't be surprised it will not live up to the great standards. It will only dissolve. And you could say we're almost replicating what happened with the end of Roe.
Almost, I don't think it's that bad just yet. And
it's heading there. It's getting there, though. That's the issue.
I'm not willing to ignore all of the, how would you say, the advancements that we've made in the form of Brexit and Trump. I just think what we're seeing is the last gasping death of those who were in power before, really kicking and squealing on their ways out. At least that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, the only issue is when it comes to the subject of Brexit, the reality is, thanks to our terrible, terrible first past the post system, it has kept the Tories and Labour shares consistently strong. Whereas if we had the proportional representation option from years ago, UKIP would have had the swing power back in 2015, because they would have gotten 99 seats, which means if the Tories or Labour wanted majority control, they would have to have done a deal with UKIP. And Farage at the time could have very easily said, "I'm not doing a deal with any of you cunts, unless you do exactly as what I say." Because you know full well the Tories and Labour are they're not going to do a coalition, because that's fucking treason in their minds.
Yes. Now, I actually have a question for the British Knight.
Okay.
I would like to hear your take on in my opinion, the recent betrayals of Priti Patel.
I think Priti Patel is. I think she was someone who was hyped as like this sort of socially conservative badass woman that was gonna whip the civil service into shape, and she was gonna really bring immigration down. But I think she's just another. She's revealed herself to be just another opportunistic wet Tory who's essentially riding off the coattails of Boris's "Get Brexit Done" campaign.
Excuse you. Yeah,
and
sorry about that, guys.
That's actually rather tragic, because she did talk a good game. She said all the right things. It's just sad to see that there's no will behind the words.
Again,
it's the same with conservatives around the Anglosphere. I mean, I absolutely love some of the speeches Ronald Reagan gave, but look what came of his presidency. Almost nothing good at all. We all got sold down the river.
Yeah, well, the problem is with Reagan, not to give loads of shade to Americans here, he was a Hollywood actor, firstly of all.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying is
from day one.
Yeah, of course, but what I'm saying is that's how conservatives have been my whole life, and I'm in my 40s. It's they talk a big game, they pander and like, oh, we're going to lower taxes, we're going to help out jobs, we're going to help industry, all this BS, and then behind the scenes they're selling us out to multinationals. They're working with the Fed, they're rigging interest rates, they're helping multinational corporations, they're tearing down antitrust laws. It's just it's BS.
Yes, which kind of goes back to my point, which basically says like you need to take a page out of Peter Hitchens' book and say, right, the Tories and the Labour, you've got to destroy them at the ballot box. And when I mean destroy them, I mean you've got to take all the hardcore Tory lovers and all the working class Labour voters. You've got to literally destroy them at the ballot box and vote for something you wouldn't dare vote for. So, for example, back in the mid-2000s when Blair was in charge, Peter Hitchens wanted the Conservative Party to lose badly in the 2007 election. Reason for that is if they get loose and get hammered so badly, it will force them to reform in order to become an actual proper Conservative party. Labour ended up reforming into New Labour under Tony Blair because they lost 4 elections in a row.
See, now that's what we thought had happened with Boris, correct?
No. I did not buy Boris or Priti Patel at all, and it pisses me off how so many of the people of our side of the fence bought into their BS, especially Theresa May. I knew full well from day one she was a Remainer because she campaigned for Remain. She was pathetically weak, and I knew full well her record as a Secretary of State, where she had the highest levels of net migration in this country's history. Trusting her with Brexit is like trusting. If I'm going to use a classic phrase here, it's like trusting a paedophile locked in a children's hospital.
Oh, God.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, I know that sounds utterly revolting, but that's how much you're meant to trust these types. Now, me personally, I mean, hell, any one of us here, or even who's watching us on the live stream, could have done a much better job with negotiating when it comes to the European Union. Because as much as they love to talk a big game, if Erdogan can pull their trousers down on the freaking refugee crisis, what do you think the United Kingdom could do when we have vastly more power and resources?
Well, here's the question, because and it was just posted in chat, and I exactly had the same question. Is there are no alternatives?
Well, the alternative was UKIP at the time.
Well, that was the alternative, but you have to how do I want to put this? You do have to look forward in the future and say who's saying all of the right things now. Who are the people calling out the establishment now? And who are those people in the UK? Like over in America, we only have like Tucker Carlson. We have a few Trump supporters like this chick in Florida, Laura Loomer, who's pretty based, and we essentially have Proud Boys who have been disgraced from public society, and their job now is to get the country on the right track. That's their only way to get to sustain themselves.
Well, I mean, in the UK's case, the US's case, you had Ron Paul for decades, but I would argue the United States didn't take. They had it right there in front of them. They didn't pick him because they were ultimately weak and stupid. And in the UK's case, you had Enoch Powell. They had their chance. He was overwhelmingly popular, but the establishment made sure he didn't win. And the public should have done the honourable thing and made sure both parties would, especially the Tories at the time with Ed Heath, should have made sure they were destroyed. And then went after, made an example of the Labour Party.
That's the problem, because I'm asking you to look forward.
Okay. Right now, I mean, in the UK, maybe that patriotic alternative party. Although I am very skeptical on them, considering I know one of their founders is an ex-BNP member.
Mm.
Yeah, the patriotic alternative are not. The patriotic alternative, they're people who. It just seems more that they're not LARPing as national socialists than actually doing anything productive to push forward actual right wing conservative, be they libertarian or authoritarian values. They're just they're LARPing as national socialists for the sake of making themselves feel better and to
I've spent a lot
justify
of time on the
hatred of certain
Patriotic Alternative
minorities.
weekly stream in the last few months, trying to get a good feel for them. And Mark Collette and the people around him, they seem to want nationalism of some type, but other than outlining a few things on their website, they don't really seem to have a strong policy platform. So I don't really know how viable of a political party that they could be. But I do like a lot of what Mark says. But what people say and what they do and what they can do is a completely different animal.
True.
Well, my biggest issue with Mark is I know full well he was I believe the leader of the Young BNP movement back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, he even did a documentary on him.
Yeah, and you had to deal with Russell Brand, who was an absolute crackhead mess compared to being a fucking Jesus lover mess like he is today. And he just came off so pathetically weak, despite him being a 19-year-old, grew up from a northern town.
Well, regardless of what we've done in the past, I mean, a lot of us used to be leftists. A lot of us have done ugly things in the past. I don't like to hold people's past against them because right now we have to worry about the now and the immediate future. And so we have to get our allies where we can. So I don't care who's been in pictures with who or who was in bed with who in the past. We need to focus on who's doing what now and what we can do to safeguard and to embolden the Western kind. And so
Amen.
in that regard, I do think that Mark is at least doing a somewhat overall good for Britain, bringing thousands of people together and helping spread awareness on these awful problems like demographic change and grooming gang lives and all this other stuff. So, in my opinion, even if he's not a viable political entity, he is doing a net good for the British people, in my opinion. What do you think,
Well,
British Knight?
I'm not convinced. I think Mark cares about Mark, and I think Patriarchal Alternative is little more than a reflection of that.
Now,
Mark,
I've heard a lot of people say that. I don't know if I believe that or not. But then again, I'm not very invested in him. I've just been trying to learn about him.
well, I mean, myself, sorry to interrupt, is I learned about it through the Iconoclast. And yeah, I mean, it sounds nice on paper, and I do watch a lot of Laurie Towler, who's one of the founders as well.
I like her
And
too. I'll
sure,
follow her.
yeah, I like a lot what they say. The problem is I don't think they actually understand what they ultimately want or necessarily how to bring about those changes, which is what I have a lot of issues with a lot of people in the political sphere and say, yeah, you may not like this, but like, how do you bring it? Like, what's a tangible solution? Like, for instance, when it comes to, let's say, the economy, me personally, one of the first things I like to do is to take Mark Kearney from the Bank of England, fuck him off back to Canada, and have all abolishment of quantitative easing and printing of money.
You see, I actually have there is some of those issues still here in the U.S. What policy should we put in place? And that's a whole other beast.
Yeah, well, I mean, like this kind of goes back to my engineering background is if we have a problem, we have to find the source of the problem and you either fix it so the problem doesn't reoccur or you destroy it so the problem no longer exists. And think in my world, Jesus Christ, if we fuck up and someone dies, our heads are on the line for industrial manslaughter. and you think I'm joking about this? No, I'm not. Even the highest ranking people even the most highest respected individuals have been taken to court over industrial manslaughter charges. And if you want a good example of this, look up the Williams court case over Ayrton Senna's death in 1994. Because Frank Williams, the owner of Williams F1, Patrick Head, the team principal, and Adrian Newey, the aerodynamicist and designer for the team, were initially charged with industrial manslaughter, but then under review, they were dropped 3 years later because of the complications with the Italian legal system.
Well, God, don't trust the Italians and legal system.
No, but here's the thing though: industrial manslaughter, especially in Europe and the United States, is an extremely serious crime. Like this is a crime that if you get punished, will 9 times out of 10 bankrupt your entire company.
Oh damn!
Yeah, and everyone who works in the industry gets all their degrees ripped from them, and they cannot work in the industry ever again. That's how ruthless they are on this thing. Like, I'll put it this way: if malpractice was in hospitals and the healthcare industry was treated to the same degree as industrial manslaughter is in the engineering world, the amount of doctors and nurses and surgeons, etc., that would be fired would be unreal.
Oof.
I'm not even joking you. And that's just one example. Just imagine, for instance, Boeing released a new plane and it crashes after its first flight, killing 500 plus people. Boeing are automatically taken straight to court within 24 hours, and they're going to be demanding to explain themselves.
Mm.
Because as
All right.
we were told, anyway, sorry, yes.
No, it's fine. It's just it's a quarter past, so we have to move to questions. We are going to start
Alright.
doing the questions now. We did not get any super chats today, which is fine. Money is good though. Money me now. But we are going to go to the question widget over on Entropy. So first up, we're going to handle what Vex asks. Vex, to the panel, now that the lockdown is largely coming to an end in the UK, do you see the mandatory mask laws as a political power play or a public health measure? We'll let British Knight start this first. Go ahead, British
I think
Knight.
it's like bringing a condom to a baby shower. To be honest, the whole point is just to it's basically just to look like they're doing something when they're not really doing a whole lot. Like it's largely past. The lockdown's largely over. The coronavirus is largely passed, as far as we can tell. There's no reason for it to be applied. And here's the thing: it's not even being enforced. Like they've openly a lot of the places that it's being put into law for it to be in, like supermarkets, for example. They're not even going to enforce it. Reason being, and this is actually it inadvertently works in our favor, even though it's kind of social justicey, is that it is because apparently they don't want to risk essentially offending disabled people by essentially asking people to wear their mask when they might have a medical reason not to. So essentially, they're going to trust people to wear the masks. Even they're going to trust people to wear the masks in the shops, but if they don't, they're not going to call them out on it.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I mean, like British Knight says, like bringing a condom to the to a baby shower, or shutting the barn door when all your horses have fled. And to me, what kind of makes me laugh about this, it's not only too little, too late, but technically speaking, the whole fine aspect is technically speaking unconstitutional, because under UK law, for you to be fined, you have to be prosecuted in court. Basically where it's, as I understand it, is they're going to implement these fines on the spot, which would skipping the jurisdiction part. And if you want an example of this, there's a distinct reason why parking fines were changed to parking penalties was because of this ruling. So I'm sure there's certain people, like for instance, Crime Bodge, who does a lot of great work on UK law and keeping officers in check. He's pointed out before that the lockdown rules where officers were fining people were all completely unconstitutional based on the same laws. So yes, if anyone wants to check his channel, I would gladly give a link to it.
I'm happy to wear a mask just because here's the thing. I was happy to wear a mask when it wasn't a law, just because I felt like it was kind of a responsible thing to do. But
that's fair.
Them putting it into law has had this inadvertent effect where I've become indignant about them putting this into law. Like at the 11th hour, I'm just like, no, I want to find ways to get around this, because no, fuck them.
Well, I mean, that is the innate spiteful spirit of the English mentality coming out. But also, the big issue is, as people pointed out, if you're asthmatic, you don't have to wear a mask. But the problem is, a lot of people will carry inhaler, but not necessarily be asthmatic and use it as an excuse. But then but how many people will carry documentation on them, proving that they are asthmatic to get around this? And do you think most people are going to deliberately enforce this to the laws to cause a huge scene, or do they want an easy life and just let things go just for the sake of an easy life?
Well, the law of averages suggests that they will obviously choose the easy life.
Exactly. So, like for me, I was wearing a mask back in March because I got one off of Amazon before they all started going, a rewashable one. Wearing it on, just wearing.
All right. I'm seizing the reins again. We're moving on. Okay. We're going to go to the next question here. It's a two-parter. We're going to do this first. Inconvenient asks the panel, putting the question of immigration itself aside, what are the panel's positions on successful integration? Do you believe it's possible, number one? And number two, if so, should these people be able to ever gain full citizenship? British Knight, take that first since you're the honored guest.
I like the Japanese model. You can't become a citizen. Your children can't become citizens, but your grandchildren can.
Huh.
And
That's the system that I like as well. I believe that we should be very, very careful with who we give the right to vote, who we give the ability to gain public resources, as well as who we give the ability to have any kind of official office. Because if you do it like we're doing now, well, then very soon we're going to have a whole army of Ilhan Omars directly undermining our government. So that's why I think you have to force assimilation by having a series of incentives and disincentives to make sure the people you attract to your country are dedicated to putting their entire life work into being a functional part of the host population's culture.
it was that kind of system also encourages, like, I guess you could say, an adoption of the Protestant work ethic, just like people working hard to get what they want, because ultimately, if they can't become citizens under an ideal system, the system we were discussing before, they can't gain access to welfare. So
yes. And while I definitely want to cut down overall migration, I don't think that it is, just like I just talked about in my recent morning walk video, I don't think that forcing an ethno-state is ethical or possible at this point. So what we have to do is focus on what we have available to us, which is money and global trade. So what we can do is through a series of incentives and disincentives, we can hopefully start having some nationalist politicians that dramatically cut down on both illegal and legal immigration, while at the same time offering a series of incentives and disincentives to weed out the chaff and hopefully encourage the good kind of immigrant when we do have to have them, ones that will want to be heavily invested and become more aligned to the Western way.
well, even if you do like hugely care about demographics, which I'll admit, it's not my biggest priority.
Well, it wasn't mine until I realized that we were being replaced at a suicidal rate.
Like, even if it is a big priority for you, like, there are perfectly, I guess you could say, again, liberal ways of going about it, which is why I don't buy into this idea that in order to achieve essentially a sustainable native majority, you need some form of great authoritarianism, and even if you did choose to go the authoritarian route, like I said, the Pinochet solution, like it would be a tyranny to ensure liberty that will eventually give way to a more liberty conducive system, just as Pinochet quite willingly did in the late 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm starting to think we're going to have something like that to save the West. It's just I'm always reticent to ask or to want for anything more authoritarian than we already have, because we've already lost so much. I would hate to gamble and lose even more, but we're starting to get to the make or break point. So I'm willing to hear about anything. Kissa, what do you have to say on that?
I mean, honestly, the entire immigration debate, I mean, what pisses me off so much about this is that it doesn't have any democratic legitimacy whatsoever. And with the whole thing about trying to bring in good immigration versus bad immigration, this is part. I mean, I like a lot what the Japanese do, but also what the Swiss do. Whereas you have to have 3 generations living in Switzerland for your great grandchildren to even be. Then they might consider them Swiss, because they are incredibly, dare I say, socially conservative and similar to with Japan. But in Japan's case, from what I understand, they do not take anyone outside the first world and, to a point, neighboring countries.
Well, I think that's good. I think we should be much, much more careful with the people that we allow to immigrate, because, I mean, look what we've got now. I mean, it's a mess. It's disgusting. You've
Like I
got
said,
Yeah,
like I said, just to get permanent residence, you need to have worked in the country, lived and worked in the country for 5 consecutive years. And which to do so, by the way, is incredibly difficult because there are only very few jobs which essentially foreigners get priority in. Like the only what's generally considered popular viable route to gaining permanent residency in Japan is to become an English teacher because
yeah, I
English is
have
their
heard that.
second language.
Yeah, I have heard that a lot because I do follow Charlotte, who's living in Japan, and she does a lot of work for Westerners about if they're interested in coming to Japan, they will help them come over, deal with all the integration aspects and so on and so forth as a service. So yeah, because from what I understand from Japan, they are socially conservative, but they are very accepting of Westerners because of their culture, because of their cultural norms and respect for uh, for civilization.
It's also the fact that a lot of the earliest travelers from Japan to the West found that they were actually greeted, especially in comparison to other minorities, were actually greeted rather respectfully, like far more so than they were originally intending. I think the only Western country they found where they were treated rather poorly was Russia, and even then, in Russia, it was only because like Russians kind of tried predictably using the Japanese to their own ends.
Yeah, of course. But like myself, I mean, I haven't spoken to many people from Japan, but I do know people who've worked with quite a lot of people from Japanese, and they're basically, uh, you could say they are very much like old school Westerners in many sense, like those who like lived in like let's say the 60s, where they're very much very like family orientated, although the birth rates would tell a different story, but they're very big on honor and respect.
All right.
Yeah, so if you have a nation where you want to be forgive me, you want to take immigrants from, Japan is one of the best places to get immigrations from.
I think the only major problem Japan has is that its history of isolationism has kind of led
Yeah.
to this idea that is kind of plus their work plus their work culture has kind of led to a point where they really don't want to have an overabundance of mixed race youth, but at the same time the native population really just aren't getting it on enough to sustain the population.
Well, I mean, on that point, I actually did watch an interesting video on this a few years ago about Japanese demographics, and actually, you're gonna laugh at this. It was about what's it called? Ego relationships and demographics, and what the issues you have with demographics here in the West are even more of a problem that you see in Japan, and their entire welfare system, especially their pension system, is literally at the point of bursting, where the government now are trying to push major radical policies to try and address this burden, like drastic increases to the age of retirement, because it used to be 60. I think now they've pushed up to 67 or 68, if memory serves. Might be even higher. What's it called? They're trying to reduce taxes to get people to have families and so on and so forth. But ironically enough, it's like this because of the, I'm sure years in carnal, you British Knight will know what I'm talking about, is the fact that women are technically speaking above men in the economic sphere.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Especially ones between the ages of 18 and 30.
exactly. Now, I mean, this is going to royally piss off the feminists here, but are you going to, but if you really want all those lovely men who are above you, well, ladies, are you going to give up 50 years of that lovely advantage you have? Or are you going to keep your advantages, but the men are going to get double the advantages in their favor?
Yeah,
Which is it?
I would genuinely say it's probably going to be the latter because we're essentially we're built as a species in that you can't give some, you don't give privileges to a group and then allow them to get used to them and then take them away overnight, because that incites instability.
Yeah.
Well, that is true. But the issue you have is, and I've had this argument before with lots of people, especially with the UK. And one thing I would argue that you won't see the Tories do, but it would fix the problem. Is that you build the entire education system around boys. You stop making it around girls, which has been the case since the 60s.
Well, here's the thing. The education system as we know it was built not to make people for the service industry, but to make people for the industrial industry.
Well, yeah, and
we have an industrial education system in a economy that's not built on industry anymore.
We also have an education industry that shapes minds to believe they are going to participate fairly and equally in a global economy, when they're really just being hollowed out of ethos, and they end up being miserable and not having anything real to latch onto. And I think that needs to stop as well.
Indeed.
Well, there's also the fact that it's for the few demographics that would exist in a, guess you could say, a large majority or super-majority state of natives, is that if you have a too big a welfare state, it turns those minorities into small, I guess you could say, insular but integrated communities into special interest voting blocks, as we've seen with the African American community of America.
Yeah, and also which we're seeing with the Hispanic group in America too.
Yeah, and the Muslim community of the United Kingdom as well.
Yeah, exactly. So with that, we need to move on because it's getting close to time, and we need to get through these. The last questions are again from Inconvenient. Inconvenient. I'm going to take this one as soon as I'm done reading it, then I'll pass it over. But Inconvenient says, as an alternative to democracy, and unrelated to previous questions, any thoughts on the Heinlein idea stemming from service guarantees citizenship of the citizen versus civilian dichotomy? Now, what he's talking about is the Heinlein libertopia from Heinlein's fiction, which of course is where you get the movie Starship Trooper, service guarantees citizenship. What he's talking about here is where in a nation, you have two types of people. You have civilians and citizens. A citizen is someone who basically, quote unquote, served a term of service in the military, unquote, which means you serve in civics. It doesn't have to be military. Anything that civics does. It's what we would call in the modern era anything political. Being a city alderman, working for the city, doing any type of service like maintenance or working in sewers. And what Heinlein did was he turned all politics away from the lobbying, shaking babies and kissing hands crap, and I said that wrong on purpose for funny, to make it all a more less glorified perfunctory service. And if you do that, you get citizenship, which comes with its own perks, and you are the one who gets to then vote on how the state does things. No one else gets a vote. Only people who have given service and become citizens get to vote on how the state shapes things in the future, how state money is handled. Everyone else lives in a mix of capitalism and National Socialism in this sort of English liberal utopia type of setup where you have free market enterprises, but everything is kept housed within a safe environment, free from extranational entities, free from war, that kind of thing. So it doesn't really accurately represent any real-world structure, but it heavily borrows from a few. So I personally like this model. It would be, in my opinion, a great way to sort of work towards a third position, which a lot of the more fashy NatSoc-aligned people want to work towards anyway. I do like a lot of what came from pre-war era Germany in regards to how things were being nationalized and how you had a sort of safety net and structure around a burgeoning economy that was just coming from the ashes of the Weimar and World War I. I do think, though, in the modern era of internet and global enterprise, we are going to have some kind of nationalist hardline severance where we break ourselves of these cancers before we can try to install anything like that, or we would just be trading one slave master for another. But in spirit, I do like that. So I'm going to pass it over to British Knight and see what he has to say about the Heinlein model.
I would say if you extend it out to essentially not just civics, but basically anything that will essentially give people roots and make them invested in their own community, and essentially make people see the value in valuing community, I think that is useful for creating citizens. For example, charitable work, charitable work, military service, public services,
or like, for example, if you run an orphanage, that kind of thing. Anything that directly gives and supports society, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and not really, and not just society, more specifically your local society.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like if you're like, it's all well and good being a nationalist, but if you're not a localist within being a nationalist, then you're essentially just creating a national homogeny, which really, on a local level, doesn't exist. There is localism is essentially nationalism within nationalism.
Like if you were a goat herder in the far reaches of Romania, it doesn't matter if your leadership is communist or Nazi or whatever. Your life is basically the same because of what's around you.
My point is that my point is that someone from Newcastle doesn't really, like, to use a UK example, someone from Newcastle doesn't really have much in common from someone from Southampton. And someone from Newcastle doesn't really have much investment in, outside of the continued success of the nation, the continued success of Southampton specifically. They have interest in the continued success of Newcastle. So in order for nationalism to be success, there needs to be a level of localism as well.
I believe in that, but unfortunately, from what I hear from people around the Anglosphere, they do not feel that sentiment anymore because of how the internet and globalization and the metropolitan boom has fractured communities and broken families. People don't seem to feel that much more. Now, I think they should, and we should encourage people to quote-unquote nationalize on the small level, which on my channel, I do that all the time. What you're saying is wise and good, but we have millions of people that come from areas and communities where, try as they might, there's no way for them to have what you're talking about. So that's why we also need to curry a national identity and a move towards bigger picture nationalism, while also telling people and encouraging them to build locally too. We need both working at the same time.
I guess my ultimate point is that you can't have a sustained successful nationalism without an investment in localism, because if you think of each,
I completely agree, by the way.
If you think of each community as like a cog in a clock, the clock doesn't work unless all the cogs are turning, and the only way for the cogs to turn in this analogy is if each individual community is running smoothly, which in the service guarantee citizenship model would be done by giving people investment in their said local community where they're born, where they grow up, and for many with this kind of mindset, where they will live and where they will die.
Yeah.
Anyone want to add anything to that about the Heinlein stuff before we move on and wrap up?
Well,
so go ahead, Frank.
If I can just wrap this up to my position on the immigration question, all citizenship should be rewarded by merit, just full stop. Whether it's your contribution to the economy, to the community at large, it should be a requirement that you at least speak English, or you should speak the native tongue of wherever you are.
The carnal conservative's answer actually ties into the final question on entropy, so I'm going to read that and then pass it back to Carnal.
All right.
The last one here is from Inconvenient again. Thanks for your answers, all. Last one, any specific ideas, any specific policies to instill cultural integration? Should it be entirely a responsibility of the immigrants coupled with social expectation of it? Obviously, yes, but go ahead and continue what you were saying, Frank. I just wanted to get that read.
Well, again, obviously, yes. There should be an absolute expectation that if you move to America, you're going to be speaking English. You can read English. You can interact with the main thrust of the populace, and there is an expectation that you will be self-reliant at the very least. That there should be no reward, no financial boon for moving to a country which you have pledged allegiance to. The onus is on the immigrant to prove their loyalty, to make something of themselves. Yes, we have the American dream, and it's there for you to take if you wish, but the onus is on you to earn it. So there should be rigor. Like, for example, we have a test, a citizenship test that comes from a pool of 100 questions, and they give you 10. You only have to answer 6 correctly. I would like that raised to at least an 8. Like, I would like people to move here to at least pass an 8 on that quiz, and I'm one of those oddballs.
Here's the thing. I think it should be an 8, but I think everyone should have to pass this crap in primary school, whether you're native born or not. I also think that it would be very based of us to require, before you get to any credentials that allow you to go to middle school, to high school, or to university, we should force everyone to pass basic competence in history, religion, civics, so they know what the hell our country is, who built it and why, and what made us great. I think everyone should have to do that, and we should hold a high bar, and if you screw up, well, until you go back and pass all of that stuff, and then you prove to the state or the country or whatever that you are fully aware of what we are, who we are, and why, you don't get unemployment, you don't get any benefits, you don't get pension, you don't get a functional passport. You have to pass these things, and if you can't, well, then back to idiot school with you. And then you're your family's problem.
I'm also sick of
because we need some way to start culling our population because things are getting out of hand. We have too many idiots and too many do-nothings and too many people that need handouts, and we need to start culling that somehow. And I think having this level of enforcement paired with the other limitations to immigration we've had, I think would be a good way to start focusing our people towards some kind of educated unity.
Well, yes. Also, one of my requirements for immigration is no more than 100,000 every 10 years. You will be integrated and no one else is getting in. But no, there is this annoying leftist narrative where most people can't answer these 10 questions, and of course I'm the oddball who gets them all right because reasons. And these are things that are necessary for any individual to know about basic civic knowledge. This is the basics. How many representatives are there? How many votes are there in the electoral college? These are the branches of government. These are things that should be instilled and ingrained religiously into the minds of our youth. For the lack of a better term, these things do need to be reinforced, and they need to be reinforced vigorously. I hope that answers the question, because the same standard that I would have for our citizens should at least be met for our immigrants, at least.
Yeah, and before I pass it over to someone else, I do believe that everything that we do should be competence-based. Politics, everything. Everything should be competence instead of just who you know and politicking and who you can get funding from and all this mess. And that means if you're going to serve in public office, if you're going to have a driver's license, if you're going to do anything that involves working with other people, operating machinery, holding public office, working in civics, everyone needs to take these tests regularly, like every 4 years, every 10 years or something, to make sure everyone stays on the same page and everyone is complicit in building a cohesive society, because we need that. Like, we have to create some way to have unity and cohesion again, because we've lost it. And until we can have everybody just sort of naturally doing that, I think we need to take the reins locally and at a federal level to start really pushing some type of unity programs to get everybody marching to the same tune again, because we've lost that and become fractured. I'll pass it back. Kissa or British Knight, you take it.
British Knight. Can you go?
Sorry, I don't really have much to say on this, to be honest. I just think that I'm just not sure that there's much we can do in order to ensure this. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there isn't much we can do that isn't a direct violation of people's inalienable rights, and like until such a point that we're willing to accept that that there are certain things which we accept in the modern world as rights or as a given.
Well, I don't see what I want as being a violation. What's a violation? I'm just talking about changing the way that we give out licenses and give out diplomas and stuff.
Well, what I mean is that the only reason we need all that is because, like, licenses and all that stuff in the first place is because we're overrun with undereducated, like, essentially undereducated, uninterested people. What we really need to do is reignite a sense of curiosity and a sense of competence in our population.
I completely agree.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I prefer to take the concept of when in Rome, do as what the Romans do, and turn it up to 11.
I don't like anything turned up to 11. That's when you get totalitarianism. I don't like that.
No, but if you take that policy and enforce it extremely strictly, and if you were to do that, let's say in the UK since 1945, I would argue over 90% of immigration would not have happened.
Well,
but I'm just saying.
Well, to bounce off what British Knight was saying, yeah. I don't think that we need to start taking away liberties. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think that we need to start forcing people to do anything outside of the parameters that we already have. What I'm saying is what we can do is vote locally, be active in local politics. Hopefully that will spread over to state politics eventually, to where we start making changes in our education system. We start putting in actual structures and statutes to encourage people to enforce people, I should say, socially, to know more history, know about the religions that made us what we are, know about our values. Because I talk to a lot of people that are younger than 30, and they know fuck all about anything, about history, about religion, about why we are what we are. The only thing that they pick up and know is what they hear randomly on YouTube and Fox News and TikTok and stuff. And I feel like that our education has completely failed almost everyone in the West. But I don't know, maybe that's just endemic of where we are now, and that's the case everywhere.
Well, it is endemic of something that British Knight was talking about before, this idea of positive rights. There's no such thing as positive rights. Positive right, the concept of a right in liberal societies is what the governed have deemed necessary that the government shall not do. That is a right. Yes. That is the essence of a right. The idea of a positive right is not a right at all. It is a government privilege. It is a mandate by the government. And mandates by the government always lead to authoritarianism. They always go to bureaucratic excess. So this idea that there is such thing as a positive right is really, truly one of the things that we have to re-educate the masses on, and reaffirm that the only rights you have are negative rights. Those things which the government cannot do and cannot take from you.
Well, I do think that liberalism does need to kind of take some of the blame for that, because the original split in the liberal tradition, as it was originally practiced in the United Kingdom and eventually spread to the US, was essentially split down the line between the classical liberals, who wanted to keep with the old tradition and in fact double down on it, which eventually became libertarianism, and which was originally called neoclassical liberalism, and those who wanted to pragmatically synthesize with the socialists, which eventually became social liberalism, otherwise known as social democracy. Like,
Yuck.
yeah, so the idea of perpetuating positive rights essentially, like, at least in part, came from a lot of liberals saying it's more important to get voted into power than it is to stick by our principles.
Yes, because the ultimate goal was gaining power, and then once you gain power is to keep it as long as possible.
Well, and for me, like, I'm watching it unfold today, and what a great lie that has been told. When we look at things like Brexit and with Trump, you can get voted in for doing the right thing and saying the right thing. You can be voted in, and especially in the case of Boris and Priti Patel, these people weren't voted in on things that for people advocating for positive rights. These people were voted in for a more traditional interpretation of what was supposed to be liberalism, or what we call today conservatism.
Well, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but I would argue the only reason they got into power was literally the slogan of "Get Brexit done, get Brexit done," whereas the opposition was just a shitstorm of anti-Semitism, Marxist propaganda, and just being retards.
Well, yes, but my point is, what does that represent? Does it did Get Brexit Done actually represent social liberalism, or was it the neoclassical side of it?
No, I would argue it represented nationalism.
Tomato.
Yeah, that's just for me.
Well, before we wrap this up, I'm going to pass it over to
Yes.
British Knight. British Knight, thank you very much for being with us today. We're at the 2-hour mark, so we're going to be wrapping it up. Is there any topic or anything that you'd like to add on to anything we've discussed today before we wrap things up?
Not really. I just want to say that ultimately everything that we discuss here today is ultimately, at least in my view, at the ultimate end of extending liberty to the people of the nation. And when we talk about stuff that, like, I guess I don't really need to tell Yiz's audience this, but for anyone who might come across this, when we talk about stuff like voluntary repatriation and stuff like that, it's not out of a hatred for minorities. It's not out of a hatred for...
Absolutely.
It's done in this idea of, ultimately a nation should be putting its citizens first, and when we're in this sort of paradoxical shit world where essentially the outsider is put first, and we're essentially in this we need to take measures which perhaps otherwise wouldn't be considered in order to ensure the continued success of the nation and the continued prosperity and liberty of its people.
I concur, my friend, and I would like to take this time to let my viewers know that at heart, I am like British Knight. I'm between a minarchist and ANCAP type of idealistic libertarian, but what has led me to where I am now is exactly what he just talked about. We have been sold down the river by the generations that have come before us so badly, and many of them in complete ignorance. It's not like everything's the boomers' fault, like people jokingly say. The systems that have led to where we are now, our values as people who believe in optimizing liberties and the free market and that kind of thing, we can no longer rely on that to fix things because of how bad the rot has gotten at the top. So we're having to discuss new ways to try to save things just to get our people back to some kind of stable baseline so we can try to optimize freedoms in the market even further. And that's what has led me to where I am today. So we are going to wrap up with that. Thank you all for coming, especially thank you, British Knight. I know that you're rarely off on Fridays, but thank you so much for taking your Friday evening off to be with us. I really do appreciate it, my friend. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to share your channel right now. And for our viewers that we have with us here at the end, tell our viewers some about what goes on your channel so they'll know what to expect when they hopefully subscribe and follow you.
Right, so my channel is based around two things. I do a weekly live stream called Exploring the Politisphere, where I interview peoples of interest on the political side of YouTube, such as Years, not this Sunday, but the Sunday after. Look out for that. And then I also do informational videos on, I guess you could say on baseline political topics, less current affairs and more for educational and informative purposes.
Mostly focused on the UK and its history, correct?
Yeah. One of them, like, I've done a book review of Animal Farm by George Orwell. I have got a series, like, I guess you could call it my flagship series, which don't come out very often for the sake of how much research they take, but they are the stuff I want to work on the most, is my Pure Ideology series, where I essentially discuss the philosophical history of certain ideologies and what they actually believe. My last one was on classical liberalism, and my next one is going to be on fascism.
Interesting. I can't wait. It's going to be great. I do like that series of yours. And like you said about liking it the most, but it's hardest to get it done. Like you, I have to work and have a lot going on in my life. And my series like that is called Deep Double Analysis. And my next one coming out is on demographic change. So be looking forward to that in the next few weeks, everyone. That's what I've been working on.
Nice.
So thank you again for coming, British Knight. I am going to shill Carnal Conservative's channel because he makes really interesting stuff, and he makes a lot of it. If you want to hear what's going on in America, what's going on in the culture war, you need to follow and listen to this man. He's got a pleasant voice, and he tells you what's up every day. So I have shared his channel here. Be sure to follow him.
I am not as active as I'd like.
Yeah, but you're pretty active. You make a lot of content, and you're also you post your content on multiple platforms. I like that about you.
Well, it's only recently that I've been posting every day because I work nights. I do most of my stuff on my phone, so I'm constantly looking for new software to help be able and promote and create more content. So that's my main struggle. So if I go silent for a week, assume shit got hectic. Just
Okay. Okay. All right. And the last link that I'm going to share here is going to be, again, to the garage party tonight. I am part of the white positive sphere, and we are people who care about saving the West and Western kind, and doing so in a non-exclusionary way, which welcomes all to help the West survive and to help Western kind be emboldened. And this is called Chuck Martell's Garage Party. I just sent the link. This is where we share community-made music, community-made comedy sketches, and just have a fun Friday night together for around an hour or so. That'll be starting in about an hour and a half to 2 hours from now. So, well, Kizza GT, Carnal Conservative,
Yes.
anything you want to say before we wrap up?
no, just it's always a pleasure. Yes, always a pleasure.
I had a wonderful stream too, and Kizza, anything?
Nothing much. For the British Knight here, if you like any help with your channel talking about stuff in Britain, I'll gladly give you a hand with that. And yes, it's always a pleasure for me to be on your stream.
Always glad to have you, my friend.
Drop me a
No
DM
worries.
and we'll see about getting
where-
some
How would I be
at
best?
Night of Britain on Twitter.
I'm not
Yes,
on Twitter, by the way. I got banned.
All right, no bother.
Yeah,
I'll-
I got
I'll
banned
fi-
on Twitter for calling the Scottish police a bunch of Gestapo Nazis.
Ha! Well, you're not wrong. They're the only centralized police force in the UK. So
Yeah.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
also banned from Twitter, so I won't be on there. You will find me on Parler.
Yeah, I would say if you're on Discord, you could get me on in users Discord by the same name.
Mm-hmm.
Know about that.
British Knight, I don't know if you're active on Discord or not, but we have a nice little
Yeah.
Discord family started. So if you want to jump in on that, I can send you the link in DM on Twitter.
Oh, absolutely. Really would appreciate that. I am very active
Certainly.
on Discord as well.
Okay,
Good
cool.
to hear.
Then
Also,
I'm going to go
sorry
ahead
to
and send that
interrupt
to you right now while we're talking, so I don't forget.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Also, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to Crime Bodger's YouTube channel. He does a lot of great work in regards to UK police. He's gone a bit quiet in recent times because he's dealing with a lawsuit against a certain abusive police officer. But
yes, now at the end is definitely the time for shilling. So if there's anything else that British Knight or Carnal wants shared, just let us know and we'll share it.
Well, just stay tuned for my content because in addition to posting daily cultural war shit, I'm also working on a role-playing game that is loosely based on Magic the Gathering card game. So
sounds fun. I'm sure you'll get a lot of people interested in that. People love their games.
Well, I hope that Warhammer 40k comes after me because I'm not Arch Warhammer and I want to destroy them. Please sue me for copyright. Please sue me for copyright infringement. I'm begging you.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here, for those that are still listening. And, of course, thank everyone for being here. Tune in next week when we will have a guest that I haven't nailed down yet. There are two likely in the running, but we will have Kizza GT and Carnal again, at least one of them, probably both. So until then, stay safe and be smart, everyone. Take care.
Take care, all. Peace out.
Night.